So thank you all for joining us for tonight's live streaming presentation, Supporting Pollinator Protection and Monarch Conservation, led by Jenna Stanek. I just want to take a brief moment to tell everyone before we get started that this presentation is being recorded, which is great because you can refer back to it on our YouTube when it's up. I am Kristen O'Hara, Director of Interpretation at Pajarito Environmental Education Center, or PEAC, located in Los Alamos, New Mexico, in case you didn't know. And I will be the moderator for tonight's talk. PEAC is a nonprofit that operates the Los Alamos Nature Center, which is now officially open all the time, 10 to 4, except for Tuesdays and Sundays. If you want to learn more about what we're up to, please visit our website, which is peecnature.org. That's peecnature.org. We are, of course, only able to offer programming like this evening and other evenings due to the generous donations from members and donors. So if you are a member or donor on this program tonight, thank you so much for your support. We couldn't do it without you. If you would like to be a member or donor, please check out our website, peecnature.org, to learn more about that. So a bit about our presenter before we get started. Jenna has worked as an ecologist for the Los Alamos National Laboratory since April 2018. Prior to that, she had worked as a wildlife biologist for a nonprofit research organization in California for 8 years. She earned her MS in wildlife and fisheries biology from Clemson University and a BS in biology and ecology from Western State Colorado University and a BA in environmental policy and Spanish at Albright College. She has worked on an assortment of projects for various species, special status species, including yellow-billed cuckoos, brown-capped rosy finches, willow flycatchers, mountain yellow-legged frogs, say that 5 times, rainbow and golden trout, and of course, monarch butterflies. Thank you, Jenna, so much for joining us this evening. And I'm going to hand it over to you and monitor the chat for questions.
Okay, thank you. I am just gonna turn on my video quickly to say hi and make sure you can hear me. So Kristen, can you hear me?
Yes,
thumbs up.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. So I'm an ecologist at the Los Alamos National Laboratory in the Environmental Protection and Compliance Division. Just gonna turn off my video because I don't know if it decreases the quality. So in the Environmental Protection and Compliance Division, where we ensure that the laboratory complies with state and federal requirements for biological resources. Monarchs and pollinators aren't within our state and federal requirements. However, we do have some conservation initiatives that have helped us support pollinator protection and monarch butterfly conservation. And that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. And I'm also going to give you some information about what you can do in your home garden to support pollinators, including monarch butterflies. So first things first, what are pollinators and why are they important? Well, pollination must occur for a plant to produce fruits, seeds, or young plants. And pollinators are organisms that facilitate plant reproduction by moving pollen from the male part of the flower to the female part of the same or another flower. And they're actually responsible for helping over 90% of the world's flowering plants reproduce. So therefore, they're really critical to our food supply and also the health and resilience of ecosystems in general. So who are these pollinators? Well, pollinators include species of ants, bats, beetles, birds, butterflies, flies, and bees. And bees are actually the dominant pollinator in most ecosystems, and nearly all bees are pollinators. So I encourage you to pay attention to the pollinators in your garden and try to identify who they are. Not always an easy task. I'm always trying to take pictures of them to identify them close up, and they fly around pretty fast, and sometimes it's hard, but I think it's fun. Most native bees are solitary, so I guess a lot of people, when you think of bees, you think of European honeybees that live in large colonies, but our native bees, rather than living in large colonies, they're solitary, and they're often more efficient pollinators, especially for our native plant species. And most native bees are actually really docile and gentle and don't sting. So monarch butterflies are one of the most well-known and iconic pollinators in North America, just a really recognizable species that lots of people can look at and say, there's a monarch. Or maybe they think they see a monarch, because actually there are a lot of monarch lookalikes. These monarch lookalikes I have up here are ones that would be lookalikes that we would see in our area. So monarch caterpillars, I'll start with them, have thin stripes of black, yellow, and white, and 2 sets of filaments. Let's see if I can get my laser pointer here to help out with what I'm talking about. But 2 sets of filaments. So 1 pair at the front, which is the antenna, and then 1 pair at the rear. The black swallowtail caterpillar, they also have a stripe pattern that includes yellow or sometimes orange, but swallowtails don't have that obvious antenna on either side of their body, and they have a wider head than overall body. The queen caterpillar has actually 3 sets of filaments. You can see 2 longer pairs toward the front, a shorter pair near the rear, and then this middle pair is what gives it away that it's not a monarch. But you can see that it does look quite similar. The monarch butterflies have dots on a black body, and then brownish, orange, and dark black lines on the upper sides of their wings, with 2 rows of orange and or white spots along the margins of their wings. And they have this, I think, characteristic like stained glass look on the hind wing when their wings are folded up. Viceroy butterflies look quite similar. That's this one, but they have this black line drawn across the hind wing. And the viceroys are also a little smaller than the monarch. And then the queen butterflies look really similar, but they have spots on its hind wing, and they're a darker orange than monarchs, and they don't have that stained glass look down here on this part of the wing. And there are no black lines up here on the upper side of the wings. And then there's painted ladies. So I think sometimes a lot of people confuse painted ladies with monarchs, just because you'll see them around similar times in spring or fall, and when they're flying by, you just get a glimpse of orange and black, and sometimes they can look really similar. They do fly a little bit more erratically than a monarch. Monarchs are just really kind of not slow flying, but they have large beats to their wings, whereas the painted ladies are just erratic, I guess is the only word I can think to describe it. But the painted ladies have orange wings with black patches. The tips of their forewings are black with small white splotches. And then the dead giveaway, though, is that on the underside of the wing, it's molted gray, brown, and black with eye spots. And also another key thing to look for or notice is that they're significantly smaller than a monarch. So North America has 2 recognized monarch populations. Generally speaking, the eastern population is east of the Rocky Mountains and overwinters in Mexico, and the western population is west of the Rocky Mountains and overwinters on the coast of California. However, there's overlap between these 2 populations, and researchers are still learning about where these overlapping populations spend the winter. So this is where the Los Alamos National Laboratory is located, and you can see that it's within the overlap zone between the 2 monarch populations. I think the most amazing thing about monarchs is that they do migrate each summer and fall to and from overwintering sites on the west coast of California, right here, or the mountainous sites in central Mexico. And this phenomenal migration takes 3 to 5 generations of monarch butterflies to complete. So in other words, the great-great-grandchildren, if you will, of the butterflies that migrated north in the spring will return to the same overwintering sites every year in the fall, which is just amazing to me. So you can see they start here in the winter, then they come up. This is about the first generation. So the ones that overwintered lay their eggs on milkweed in the spring as the milkweed's starting to come up. And then these eggs go through the life cycle, turn into butterflies, and they travel farther north, in this case, farther east. And then they also travel up in elevation. So here in Los Alamos, we start seeing ours later on because of the elevational difference, whereas like Albuquerque or farther south in New Mexico sees them earlier. So researchers estimate monarch numbers at overwintering sites when all the monarchs are gathered together and they can do consistent counts of the population. And so these estimates have been documented since 1995, and that's the numbers this graph is showing. And it's showing the estimates over time from both eastern and western populations combined. The monarch butterfly populations have declined by over 85% in the last 2 decades. In 2020, there were estimated to be 150 million monarchs. Now, you might think that 150 million monarchs sounds like a lot, but in reality, monarchs need a really large population size to be resilient to threats from severe weather events, disease, and predation. For example, a single winter storm in January of 2002 killed an estimated 500 million monarchs, and that's roughly 3 times the size of the current population. In 2014, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was actually petitioned to protect the monarch butterfly under the Endangered Species Act. And in 2020, in December of 2020, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service decided that monarchs are warranted for listing under the Endangered Species Act, but are not yet listed due to higher priority listing actions. So what this means is just that there aren't enough resources available. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will review annually the status of their listing now as a candidate species. And when future resources are available, they'll be listed as a federally protected species. Or if the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service decides that the monarch populations are increasing and they don't need to be listed, then they will decide that they don't need to be listed. So monarchs are known to occur in Los Alamos County, breeding from July through September. Some of the reasons for decline, well, there are many reasons for the monarch butterfly population decline, but one of the main reasons is loss of milkweed plants in agriculture and other landscapes. Milkweed is the only type of plant that monarch caterpillars can eat. Also, a lack of floral food resources for breeding and migratory adults. Non-target toxicity of pesticides to monarchs. Someone might spray for a pest in their garden, but then they might kill a monarch too. And then also degradation of overwintering habitat. So just loss of habitat in their wintering areas. I've been focusing on monarchs, but pollinators have also been having declines, or at least there's mounting scientific evidence of pollinator species declines all over the world. And the consequences in many agriculture areas could be really significant. Pollinator declines are attributed to habitat loss, pesticide exposure, disease, parasites, and effects from introduced species. So at the Los Alamos National Laboratory, we follow the Department of Energy's Pollinator Protection Plan, which is an initiative to support pollinator habitat enhancement. Monarchs make an excellent umbrella species for pollinators. Since they are such an iconic, well-known butterfly, we focus on them to promote the Pollinator Protection Plan. And we also focus on them because they are candidate species under the Endangered Species Act. So currently we're gathering baseline data for our area because if the species is listed under the Endangered Species Act, then we're going to need accurate best management practices. So our monitoring and conservation measures now are going to help us establish our future management recommendations if this species does get listed. So within the Biological Resources Program, which is a program I work for, we identify sites where the seeding of regionally native wildflowers, including milkweed, are possible, and we try to help make that happen. We monitor milkweed and monarch sightings on lab property to document the timing of their life cycles. So in other words, what time of year are their adults, eggs, caterpillars? And this helps us improve guidelines, management guidelines, and to better inform management decisions. We participate in outreach events about monarchs and native pollinators, and we also participate in a study to tag monarchs to help inform scientists about migration and overwintering areas. So since 2018, we've documented what species of milkweed grows natively in our area, and we protect the large milkweed patches on lab property as best we can, and we collect seed for propagation. We don't collect all the seed from all plants at one location, and we try to obtain seed from multiple locations. So here's 4 pictures of the 4 most common species in Los Alamos County and ones that we see on lab property. On the left is butterfly weed. Grows in well-drained soil and full sun, but can also tolerate partial shade. So we see it a lot like in openings in ponderosa pine forests. It can have yellow to orange flowers. I've seen both in the county. Once it's well established, it is heat and drought tolerant, but the deer do love it in my yard. And it can grow 2 to 3 feet in height if it's really happy, but usually it's smaller than that. Showy milkweed grows best with moderate water and in full sun. But once it is well established, it is drought tolerant, and the deer don't mess with it, or at least I haven't seen them mess with it. I guess they do eat the pods sometimes, but it can be about 2 to 3 feet in height. And then there's antelope horn milkweed, which is also called spider milkweed, and it does well in well-drained soil with full sun. You see it on top of mesas, just out there growing. Does really well. And once it's established, it is heat and drought tolerant, and I haven't seen the deer mess with it. So it is deer resistant, and it has a very low water requirement, which is great. And I mean, these flowers are just gorgeous. I love the flowers. It's such a beautiful plant. Not a weed. That's subjective, right? Okay, and horsetail milkweed, a lot of people probably do think this is a weed because it grows commonly along roadsides in full sun, and once it's well established, it is drought tolerant and deer resistant, and it's pretty easy to grow from seed. So this is a good one. Has white flowers, and I'm pretty sure Kristen has some horsetail milkweed seed available for participants if they are interested. So collecting milkweed seed, some tips. Don't collect all the seed pods from one plant because that's just not ethical. I don't know. You don't want to take all the seeds. So the rule of thumb is to leave greater than 2/3 of the seeds. We usually even collect less than that. And don't forget to get permission if you're collecting on anyone else's property aside from your own. You want to wait until the pod has cracked open or has split. So sometimes I'll touch the pod and kind of give it a gentle, you'll see where it will split. And if you kind of see if you can split it just by gently opening it with between your two thumbs, then it's ready. But if you can't, just by gently pulling your thumbs away from each other, then it's not ready. And if you pick it too early, then the seeds won't germinate because they're not yet mature. So you do not want to pick it too early. But once you do collect the pod when it's ready, you can store it in a brown paper bag until it's dry and then separate the fluff from the seeds. Now, I have to admit, this isn't always the best technique because it gets everywhere, like up your nose, on all your clothes. Just don't do it in the house, do it outside. And there are some other techniques that people use. You could probably Google it and find some YouTube videos. So in my experience, our area with our locally collected seed it does better if you cold stratify it. And therefore it's a good strategy to plant seeds in the late fall or to cold stratify the seeds prior to planting in the springtime. So this strategy is different for warmer areas and different types of milkweed that don't have harsh winters. I mean, there's over 28 different species of milkweed just in New Mexico. There are a lot of different species of milkweed. So this graph is actually from a small experiment that I did with showing milkweed seeds. And for me, the milkweed had the best germination rates with cold stratification. So that's all this is showing. It's almost close to 80%. So planting a variety of nectar flowers that bloom from spring to fall for pollinators and migrating monarch adults is really important. Nectar flowers are really important for adult monarchs, especially for those that are migrating, and also important for other pollinators too. So at Lano, we plant native and non-invasive varieties in suitable areas that won't be mowed, or we try to. Some examples include asters, coneflowers, penstemon, native sunflower species. We've incorporated some pollinator-specific plant species, including milkweed, into the official Lano reseeding mix, which is required for use after ground disturbances. There are some good resources put out by the Xerces Society on recommended plants for pollinators in different areas of the US. And there's one specific for, I think it's Santa Fe and Albuquerque. I sent a link to Kristen. I think she's going to share it. But also, if you're interested in a list of species recommendations for our area, Kristen, I think, was going to share that in the survey. And yeah, I worked with a local Xerces Society to compile that list, or she helped me. So also at Lano, we monitor milkweed locations and monarch sightings, which allows us to know the monarch life cycle for our area. In other words, what months do we have eggs, caterpillars, and butterflies? And we use these data to guide restoration and management efforts for our area. We also submit our data to Journey North and Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper to allow researchers nationwide to better understand where and when monarchs and milkweed occur. So nationwide data on monarch caterpillar sightings has been used to make management recommendations on best roadside mowing times. And since a lot of milkweed species do grow along roadsides and mowing along roadsides is a common occurrence, this is really important information to have in order to protect any monarchs that might be using the roadside milkweed. So you can see our area is a big blank space because there were not enough data available to run these spatial models. However, if you extrapolate from the east side of the model and the west side, the recommended time frame for mowing is from mid to late October through April 1st. And then if summer mowing is necessary, they recommend it be done from July 1st to July 20th. So we wanted to see if these recommendations fit our area. So we documented the occurrence of monarch adult eggs and larvae in our area since 2018. And we observed milkweed starting to sprout in early May, but we didn't see our first monarch adults until early July, and our first eggs in mid-July. Our last eggs have been observed in early September, actually this year. From egg to butterfly, it takes about 5 weeks. So we can assume that the butterflies will not emerge and start their migration until as late as mid-October. Based on our observations, then, we can make some preliminary mowing management recommendations, although more data are needed for more robust management guidelines, especially if the species is listed under the Endangered Species Act. So we've recommended that our organization prioritize mowing prior to July 1st, and preferably not mow between 1st of July through 15th of October. And then if mowing is necessary during that time frame, we request that we check the milkweed patches for eggs, caterpillars, and pupa prior to mowing. So unfortunately, roadside mowing on Los Alamos National Laboratory property does happen during the peak monarch breeding season in our area. So the wildfire roadside mitigation treatments at the lab are absolutely necessary, and they provide safe evacuation routes in the event of a wildfire, which is very important. The good news is that we've currently been working really closely with the Wildland Fire Program, who are awesome, to develop solutions. And we've collaborated with them to not mow a large patch of milkweed in order to preserve it as a seed source for mitigation and restoration projects. And they've also agreed to let us check areas with milkweed for monarch eggs, caterpillars, and pupa prior to mowing. And we plan to continue this collaborative effort in the future to help protect monarchs on lab property. And yeah, I'd love to chat with people from Los Alamos County about roadside vegetation and management guidelines, if anyone knows someone. So when we check the milkweed that does need to be mowed, we usually find it, well, at certain times of the year when we check it, we find eggs or caterpillars on the milkweed, and we collect them. And we rear them in outdoor enclosures to make sure that we're not changing their environmental cues that they actually need to know that they have to migrate south to their wintering areas. And then we use the monarchs as ambassadors for outreach presentations and butterfly releases to engage and educate the local community. And people get really excited about monarchs. I guess I do too, but the kids are especially fun to work with. Before releasing the butterflies, we aim to check the adult monarchs for the OE parasite, which can spread to wild populations and cause deformities and even death if the infection is really severe. So we check for that. We also put tags on the adults in the hopes that they are recited on their way to or at their overwintering areas. You can see them here. These are the tags, and there's a tagged butterfly. So we order the tags from the Southwest Monarch Study, and we collaborate with them to send them the data and then see if any of our butterflies are recovered, which none have been yet. There are only actually 2 recovered tags from New Mexico, and both were documented overwintering in Mexico. So there's not a lot of data on the migration route or where monarchs overwinter. I mean, it's a sample size of 2. And remember, we're in the integration zone of the eastern and western population. And interestingly, Arizona has documented that their monarchs go to both the coastal California wintering grounds and then also Mexico wintering grounds. So it is interesting to me to know where New Mexico monarchs go, or to get more data on that. So what we've learned, collaboration is really key. It's been great working with the Wildland Fire Program. It's been great working with Peak, local elementary schools, and especially when it comes to roadside mowing and educational outreach, we're really grateful to all of our partners who have worked with us on these efforts over the past couple years. We've really learned to know our local milkweed species and where they are. And knowing the timing of the monarch life cycle for an area, especially if you're dealing with mowing, is really crucial. So with that, you have to be able to identify monarch eggs and early instar larvae, which are, I guess I didn't mention this, but they're really hard to see. The monarch eggs are the size, of the top of a pinhead. And then the larvae, I mean, when they hatch, they're like half the size of my pinky nail. They're so tiny and they hide. So yeah, that's been, we've been learning and gotten a lot better. Also promoting native seed plantings of native milkweed and native nectar flowers. I mean, it seems like it's a little thing, but I think as a collaborative effort, it can really make a huge difference. So yeah, engaging the local community. Their yards have the potential to be a really big contributor to native plantings and therefore an increase in habitat for our native pollinators, including monarchs. So on that, what you can do for pollinators in your own garden, plant a variety of native plants with diverse bloom times and varied flower shapes and mixed coloration. There's this, that's what I was referring to earlier, the list of pollinator plants for Albuquerque and the Santa Fe region put out by the Xerces Society. And I've found, well, just in my own yard, the bees really love my penstemon. So I've been trying to have a lot of different penstemon. And I mean, Peak is gorgeous with all its penstemon. Providing shallow water dishes with rocks for bees or wet areas for butterfly puddling. You can preserve undisturbed wild areas in your yard. Be really mindful of pesticide use. That's an important one. And be smart about garden cleanup. So this is something that I don't know. I guess I have definitely fallen into too. You don't want to cut down the dead plant stems too early. Many insects nest in or pupate on dead stems of flowers and shrubs, so you can wait as long as you can to do your spring garden cleanup. Ideally, you should wait until the daytime temperatures are consistently above 50 degrees Fahrenheit for at least 7 consecutive days. And then you can toss and cut the perennial and woody plant stems onto the compost pile really loosely, or you could spread them at the edge of the woods. Many of the insects taking shelter inside the plant stems will still be able to emerge when the time is right. So another option, one that I kind of prefer, is to take the cut stems and put them in bundles and then just lean them against a fence or a tree at an angle. And then again, the insects sheltering inside of them will emerge when they're ready. Prune with care. Yeah, just that might be an insect's home in there. Don't mulch too early. There are a lot of beneficial insects and pollinators who overwinter in soil burrows as either eggs, pupa, or adults. So some examples include the hummingbird, clearwing moths, soldier beetles, and many native bees. So covering the ground with a really thick layer of mulch too early in the spring might block their emergence. So hold off on mulching chores until the soil dries out a little if you can and the weather warms. And like I said, I know that's not everyone's idea of spring gardening, but it could help our pollinators a little bit. Some of those things. And I'd just like to quickly acknowledge some of my colleagues and managers for making this work possible. And a really big thank you to Peak for working with us to create an outdoor enclosure. It's been fantastic. And I guess I can take any questions.
Okay, awesome. Going to the top. Give me 1 second. So there's a couple slides that were specifically called out. If you don't mind going back to them, Jenna. There was slide 13, and this is from Colleen. What type of milkweed is the picture in the middle on the bottom?
Okay, I can answer this question.
I know you can.
That is a showy milkweed.
Showy milkweed. There you go.
Asclepius speciosa.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so this one, there's just a comment.
The one on the bottom left, well, I guess I just want to point out, the one on the bottom left of that slide that's the antelope horn spider milkweed.
Oh, okay.
She was talking about the middle one, right? With the seeds?
Middle one, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so this one is from Reed and it's slide 25.
25. All right, let me get there.
And it's the question is, can you comment on how to provide water for bees and butterflies, but avoid creating mosquito breeding habitat?
Okay, so I mean, I don't know if this is the best strategy, but for me in my yard, I just have like a shallow dish, which was actually the bottom of a planter, like a like a pot, the bottom of a pot. And I filled it with stones, rocks, and then I just when I'm watering, I have it in an area where I kind of give my plants a little bit of extra water every once in a while. And when I think of it, I just fill it with water. Um, that's my strategy because yes, we don't want the mosquitoes. They're no fun.
Okay, so it drains pretty easily then.
Well, it dries out because it's really shallow. So,
Yeah.
especially in the summertime, I mean, it doesn't last long, but
Mhm.
I fill it. I mean, you could have one that's not as shallow and the water would stay longer. I'm trying to think of the length of a life cycle of a mosquito. It's got to be past 7 days. So, I mean, in the summertime, if you have a shallow dish of water, it's gonna dry out pretty quick. So the mosquito larva will be dead at that point.
Cool. Good tip. Good tip. Okay. Do you know of any sources of narrow spectrum pesticides that would be available to county departments and to residents?
Spectrum, so like they are specific to certain groups of plants.
That's what it seems like. Dorothy, if you want to give a little bit more specifics to that question. She might have. Oh,
Oh,
no, I'm sorry. It wasn't her.
oh, I was gonna say I don't know. Hopefully they're out there if you need to use them, but yeah, I don't know.
Oh, Dorothy's specific to only the pest species identified: fungus, insect, plant.
Um,
Like, is there a like pesticide out there just for, this is a really lame example, but like tomato hornworm?
your hands and eyes. I don't know. That's what I do with them. I don't know. No, I don't know. Maybe there is. I think they do make them for like certain groups of insects, but honestly, I don't know the names of them or anything. But I think there are certain ones that target um, certain insect types, but I'm not sure. I'm sorry, I can't answer that question. I don't know.
Okay. That was a great question, Dorothy. Thanks for asking. You got a couple thank yous. And this is what I understand from the mosquito-borne disease people at Lanel. It's 5 to 7 days of stagnant water.
Okay. Yes. Got it right.
Good job. Okay, so can you explain cold stratification again?
Okay. Yeah, when I was talking about it, I'm like, should I go into more detail? So you can Google cold stratification of milkweed and get tons of great resources. So I'll just put that out there. But cold stratification, if you think about what plants just in our area go through in the fall. So they drop their seeds in the fall, and then there's winter time. It gets really cold and wet because maybe it snows, and then in the spring they're still warming up, but they were cold for a certain amount of time, cold and wet for a certain amount of time. So that is basically cold stratification, and you can mimic it in your refrigerator. So what I did with those seeds, where I could bring back the graph, but I took the seeds, and like I said, you can Google this and find instructions online, especially if you type cold stratification and milkweed. Where is it? Did I pass it? Yeah. Okay. And you take the seeds and you get them very lightly damp in a paper towel. So you wet a paper towel very lightly, not too wet. You put the seeds in there, you fold them up, put them in a Tupperware container, label them with a date, and then about 4 to 5 weeks, I found that 6 to 8 is a little too long because they start to maybe get a little funky, moldy, depending how wet you made the paper towel, I guess. But even when it was really lightly damp. So you leave them in there for about 4 weeks and then take them out, and then you can start germinating them like inside. That's what I usually do. I usually cold stratify them in my fridge starting probably about January for 4 weeks, and then I start growing them under. I have a small little grow light setup. I'd have a whole greenhouse if my husband would let me, but yeah, I just have a small setup, and yeah, by the time you can plant them outside, then they're pretty big, or not pretty big, but big enough to survive outside. And you have to harden them off too. So when you're moving them outside, set them outside during the day and bring them in at night for at least 5 days before you actually just leave them outside and before you plant them outside. Did that all make sense?
It made sense to me.
Okay. Went off on a little tangent, but I hope I answered the question okay.
Okay, so this is about species of milkweed. You mentioned that there were many species in New Mexico, but there's 4 in our general area, right? What are the other species that are found?
In New Mexico?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh.
So many.
Can I send you a link? I don't know if I have them all memorized, is why I say that. But these 4 that
Go ahead.
Sorry, what?
I was gonna say like maybe a rough estimate of how many there are.
Oh, how many? I think there's about 28 in New Mexico. But there's over 100 species in North America, if not more. I don't know the exact number.
Okay.
So I'll just go.
Is a lot.
28's a lot.
In that list that I put it in the chat a little bit earlier, does that list a lot of the varieties or of the species?
Of milkweed?
Mm-hmm.
No, that list focuses, a lot on our native pollinator plants, and it has milkweed in it, but it only has like these 4 ones that I'm showing on this slide here. These are the most common ones here. And you think about New Mexico, like New Mexico is really diverse, right? Mm-hmm. So we have a lot of different, microhabitats. So ecosystems, habitat conditions. So 28, that seems reasonable. But for here in Los Alamos County, these are the most common. There are others in Los Alamos County that have been documented here, but these are the ones that I see out in the field the most. So that's why I highlight them. And I guess I should just point out that this one, butterfly weed, is a beautiful addition to just like a flower garden. It's this one's a little sprawly that I took a picture of. I should probably update it to, actually I have a different one. Where is it? But it's a beautiful plant that, no, I went way too far. That would look great in a flower garden. And same with, it's up here. So this is one that was growing. It's gorgeous. Same with the antelope horn milkweed. I think it's just it's low growing, so it doesn't get too crazy, and it has a beautiful flower. I mentioned it earlier. The big. Sorry, I'm jumping around here.
No, you're good.
I'm just showing you a picture.
Sure.
That one.
While you're finding the picture, I'm just going to say that if you're really curious about the many species of milkweed that live in New Mexico, the entirety of it, Kim F just posted a link in the chat. Thank you so much, Kim. That was going to be my next question. And it's
Thank
from
you.
the Species Society. They're so great.
Yes, I love them. And then also the link to that's going to be in the survey that has a list of pollinator species you could plant, and also it highlights the 4 milkweed species and kind of like their growing pattern and the type of growing requirements they need. And also, Kristen, did you want to expand on like the horsetail milkweed seed that maybe you have available?
Oh, yes. We have some horsetail milkweed seed that we have put into envelopes that is free for the taking. If you would like some, stop by the Nature Center and you can grab some of those. There's about 20 per envelope, which is a lot of milkweed. And then Jenna, did you want to give away some plants as well?
Oh yeah, I also have some antelope horn plants that I grew from seed. So I started them kind of late in the season, so they're not huge or anything, but I have 7 of them. So if anyone wants them, I could leave them at Peak for free. And if you don't, I'll plant them in the community garden in White Rock. So
either way, it'll be good for the monarchs.
yes.
So I have a couple more questions. One of which is, how long does it take once you seed in a plant and it grows, hopefully, how long does it take for it to bloom? How many years?
Probably depends how much TLC you give it. So I gave my friend Chuck Hathcock some seeds, and he kind of amended the soil, and he had them, I guess, right out back his porch, and he grew them all summer, and he watered them regularly, and I think he just took really good care of them, and they were blooming by the end of the season. Whereas I had some that I hadn't supplemented the soil as much, just planted it in a place that I was like, it should do fine here. And, I watered it, but it wasn't regularly, and mine didn't flower that first season. So yeah, I think it depends a little bit on the TLC you give it. Supplementing the soil, I find it helps. I know they're native and they're supposed to grow in the native soil, but I think it's just like water. If you water it more, it'll flower more. If it has more nutrients, it does better.
Right. Okay. Good. I always thought it took 2 years, but that makes a lot of sense. So this is two more milkweed related questions, and they are, what attracts monarchs to the milkweed, and are there specific kinds of milkweed that they're more attracted to than others?
So if we're talking adults, I think they're attracted to the milkweed because that's the only thing that their caterpillars will eat. So if they're a breeding female, they're going to be attracted to the milkweed to lay eggs. But I think they're attracted mainly to the flowers. It's food, right? And these milkweed, they attract a lot of different pollinators too. They're really great pollinator plants. As far as preference for milkweed, I don't know that I have enough data or have read enough studies, if there are any studies about that out there, to say for sure. But I am sometimes surprised when I'm like, wow, I found this really big caterpillar on this horsetail milkweed, and it's got these tiny little leaves. And but yeah, I did find a lot of eggs and caterpillars on horsetail milkweed this year. So don't roll out horsetail milkweed. And it's also, I guess I should mention, the horsetail milkweed, and maybe this is part of it, it has a lot of milkweed sap. So the concentration of milkweed sap is really high. And so you don't want pets or horses or cows eating it. Just FYI. Or children, but hopefully your children wouldn't eat it. Just throwing it out there. But the butterfly weed, and this is probably my hypothesis anyway, why the deer will just eat it like crazy, is the butterfly weed doesn't have any sap. You break the leaf apart and nothing comes out, but it's a milkweed. It's in the Asclepius genus. They lay their eggs on it, so it is interesting.
That is
There
really
probably are differences. I don't know.
okay, awesome. So this last question is, unless there's another one that comes in, is another question. Did you say that 3 to 5 generations are needed to complete migration, question mark?
I've heard 5, but I've also heard 4.
Right.
So I think it depends on where you are and where you're talking about. Like maybe, I mean, I don't know if people really know exactly. I'm not sure, but
Okay.
you could be conservative and say 4.
I know that on our enclosure sign, we say 4, so.
Okay, 4 is fine.
4 is fine.
I just wonder because I have friends in Texas and like it seems like sometimes we'll be done, our monarchs here, and then they'll be like, "Yeah, I just found eggs."
Oh,
I'm like,
wow.
"Wow, they're still going." So I don't know. It makes me wonder.
Cool. More research. Always more
Yeah, I
research.
guess so.
Good stuff. Okay, unless we have any other questions, and I'll wait a second.